Siva Ko. Well, welcome, I guess, or rise to the challenge. That's what that means in Pandora. But welcome to the Mickey Blog YouTube channel. And today this is a full-on spoiler talk review of Avatar: The Way of Water, the long-awaited sequel to the smash hit Avatar that dropped in 2009 and has, to this date, made over $2.9 billion worldwide. Obviously, a lot of hype leading up to this film, and we're going to talk all things spoilers, from what I really loved, the characters that I loved, the stuff I'm looking forward to in the sequels, or sequel, depending on how this does at the box office. But regardless, all of that, first I want to welcome you to the channel. If you're new here, this is the Mickey Blog YouTube channel, and here we cover all things Disney, from the films to the theme parks to the business, company, and far more. So welcome if you're new here. Definitely hit that like button, subscribe if you're new. And let's jump right into it. So obviously a very, very long-awaited, hyped-up sequel. Whether they tried to have it hyped up or not, it was bound to be that way. I mean, 2009's Avatar was not just a visual spectacle, but it made a ton of money. I mean, not just like a decent amount of money. I mean, the most money ever. So yeah, by default, this film was hyped up. So we're going to talk about whether that lived up to expectations and whether it, for me, was better or worse, or where that stood. So going right into the film and starting off at the beginning, obviously the film starts off and spends a good amount of time trying to catch the viewers up. You know, you had 13 years there where you're trying to figure out not just where Jake Sully and Neytiri, our two leading characters, are at and what they've been up to these past, 13 years plus, but, trying to drop us back into the world of Pandora. I felt, and this is just a personal opinion, obviously, I felt that whole beginning stretch was ironically almost rushed. And I know that sounds crazy for a 3-hour and 10-minute long film, but they really tried to shoehorn us right into the action. And in some ways, I love that, because I didn't want the film to feel like it was going to drag, because it was 3 hours and 10 minutes. But leading all the way up to when Quaritch gets brought in and the action starts, and Quaritch, obviously sort of takes Spider and the kids, I felt like that was all just like, whoa, okay, all right, slow down here. So in a way, I felt like this film could have been longer. And James Cameron has recently been talking about how Avatar, eventually he'd love to drop like a 9-hour miniseries cut of the film on something like Disney Plus, and then release like a 2.5 or 3-hour cut of the film in theaters. And I think that's a really fascinating idea for a number of reasons. I mean, obviously, you can get a lot more out of TV shows, as we've seen through many successful TV shows, but in general, I think it's interesting how a film that's this long, over 3 hours long, to me felt rushed at the beginning. I'm not going to lie. And in many ways, I felt like there was so much exposition going on, and yet at the same time, it felt like it was really trying to just get, okay, Quaritch is here and the chase is on, kind of thing, which was just fascinating to me. But let me say, at the beginning of this video, or towards the beginning of this video, that overall, I love this movie. I thought it was a fantastic sequel. I thought it was a fantastic addition to this franchise. And I'm rooting for this film, not just to make a lot of money at the box office, to make all the people who call Avatar irrelevant sort of shut up, how have we, but I'm rooting for this film so that we get all of the story. So James Cameron has been on the record and talked about that. So basically, if this film doesn't do very well, he plans to end the franchise at the third film, and has a game plan on how he can sort of wrap it up there and put a bow on it and move on. However, the scripts have been fully written. In fact, the fourth film has been partially shot, but the scripts have been fully written for the fourth and fifth film. So if the demand is there, if this film makes enough money, then I think we're going to see those films get made. Now, what is enough money? I personally think this film needs to make anywhere between $1.5 and $2 billion, which would put it in the top 10 films of all time in terms of highest grossing films. I predict it to make 1.8 between 1.8 and 1.9 billion, somewhere in that world, which would put it the seventh highest film of all time. And I think that'll be enough for Disney, 20th Century Studios, and James Cameron to make all five. But the reason I'm mentioning all this, folks, is that I feel like this film, and I'm not sure how many others feel this way, I felt like this film was filled with so much exposition that it was almost a setup for those sequels. And I'll explain why in a little bit. So, obviously, jumping into visuals, we get dropped right into Pandora right at the beginning. You're flying through the floating mountains. You're back with the, with the classic clan and with Neytiri and with Jake Sully. And now they have children. And let's jump into the children a little bit. So Jake Sully and Neytiri have several kids. They have Neteyam, who's the oldest one, Loak, Tuk, who's the young kiddo. She's the little one. Kiri is an adopted child, and we're definitely going to go over her. And then there's Spider. Spider is a human who was born on Pandora and was raised by basically this tribe, and is almost like an adopted child to adopted fifth child. They actually call the other four kids of Jake Sully and Neytiri call Spider like cousin, because that's how they view him. But anyways, they have these four kids, three of their own, one adopted, and then one, even further adopted cousin, shall we? And of course, we learn that Spider is actually Quaritch's son. So that adds an extremely important and interesting element to later in the film, and I'm just I'm really interested to see where that leads. But I think the kids were some of the best parts of this film. I felt like all five of them really added different elements. But as cool as the Neteyam and Loak storyline was, where they jumped heavily into, brothers and Loak wanted to be and wants to be this warrior, much like his father. And Neteyam is much more reserved and smart and follows the rules, shall we? I felt like both of them were not really even the interesting part of the story for me. I didn't feel like either of them connected with me the way that Kiri did. And I'll explain why in a second. But it's not to say I didn't enjoy their storyline, because I did. I thought they were both very interesting characters, and I'm excited to see more from all of the kids. But I do felt like Kiri is where we should have spent more of our time with. Now, why? All right, let's jump into that. Kiri, of course, is played by 73-year-old Sigourney Weaver. Now, Kiri is a 14-year-old child in the Avatar films, and she was born of like an immaculate conception, basically. Nobody knows who the father is or how she was born, but she was born from, Dr. Grace from the first film, her avatar's body. Now, of course, we know that Dr. Grace passed away in the first Avatar film, but the avatar body remained, and even though nobody was living in that body, it's incredibly fascinating to me how that avatar body basically got pregnant, which, again, the humans and nobody thought that was even possible. And then for that avatar to actually birth a child, Kiri, of course, played by the same character, something seriously crazy and very cool was going on there. To me, that storyline was the coolest part of the film. I'm not sure how other people feel about that. Definitely let me know in the comments if you agree, but that whole storyline was the coolest part of the film for me. I wish we spent more time with Kiri, and that's why hopefully I do hope we get, whether it's a miniseries on Disney Plus or a director's cut, because this character, she was so cool, and I feel like we didn't spend enough time with her. I feel like, thankfully, there's hopefully more to come in this universe, but it felt like every time she was on screen, her connection with Awa, her unique connection with her avatar and Grace as her mom, and all of this, like, it just made me want to learn more and understand how this story came to be. So yeah, just speaking of the kids in general, obviously, as we know, at the end of the film, Neteyam passed away during the battle. R.I.P. Neteyam. But, between Loak, Tuk, Kiri, Human Spider, I think we as fans have a lot to be excited for in terms of looking forward into the upcoming films, and how we can view these characters and all that. There's a lot to be excited about. Jumping into Loak obviously, as I mentioned, is just this struggling sort of son who wants to be great and wants to live up to his father in so many ways, and he just can't seem to figure it out because he keeps pushing too far, being aggressive. But what I loved about this film is, even though Natayam, his older brother, was constantly trying to teach him right from wrong and constantly trying to be Jake Sully's, more trusted, better, well-behaved son, so much of this film is about Jake Sully learning how to be a father, not just the kids learning how to be kids. So I felt like that was an interesting storyline too. But beyond all of these characters, I do think the film, as much as I felt like it really, really was rushed at the beginning and took a while to find its footing, when the film hits that new tribe, when the film gets about midway through and gets to the water sequences, that's where I felt like the film started to find its footing. That's, of course, where we meet Ronau, played by Kate Winslet. Welcome back to the James Cameron universe of films. Kate Winslet, obviously formerly of Titanic, and Tonawari, played by Cliff Curtis, who also does an amazing job. They are the leaders of their clan, and this water tribe is very different, completely focused on, their way of life on the water, within the water, and all that. And this is where I felt like the film really started to find its footing. And I'll get into that in just a moment. But first I want to talk about Quaritch, because obviously that's a major part of this film and moving forward, going into the sequels. So years ago, when it was announced that Stephen Lang was going to be the main villain for all the Avatar sequels and will be returning as Quaritch, I remember thinking in my head, like, okay, how? I mean, he took 3 very large poison arrows basically right in the chest in the first film. Like, how are they going to make that work? And of course, in this film, we learn how. We learn that basically before they left for Pandora in the first Avatar film, obviously this happened off screen, we didn't see this all happen, but before they left for Pandora, they uploaded some of the biggest, baddest, most important human marines and soldiers' consciousness up into backup Avatar bodies. And that way it was sort of a backup plan. If things were to fail, as they did for the humans in the first Avatar film, they could send those characters back to Pandora. And that's exactly how Quaritch, or Stephen Lang, comes back. Of course, there's this whole element throughout this film where Quaritch is sort of struggling with his identity. Because he is Quaritch, but he's not really Quaritch, if that makes sense. I mean, he's obviously in an Avatar body. He has his consciousness. He has his memories. But he's also, you notice and you realize he is his own, not person, but avatar and character. And I think that's where I'm most curious to learn more about Quaritch in the third film and the fourth film, fifth film, and as we go forward, because it just felt like he, in general, obviously such a cool character and a badder, bigger, just more terrifying in this film. But it was interesting because the storyline, the idea of him being in the film as this avatar and the whole backup consciousness, that whole concept, again, felt a little rushed at the beginning of the film. It felt a little like shoehorned in, if that makes sense. Like, if there was even a little bit of teasing going on in the first film of that storyline, I think it would have made a little bit more sense. But because there wasn't at all, and it was just like very much so led for us to believe like, hey, he's dead, that's it, at the end of the first film, I guess my issue and my concern with that is going forward, whether it's just the third film or the fourth and the fifth, if he is that main villain in all of these films, how are they going to keep convincing us they can keep having these big fights and then he almost dies and then like just barely survives, sort of thing? That's where I get concerned. That's where I'm almost a little like, is this going to work out? So I'm interested to see where they go with the Quaritch storyline. I thought it was very cool that he was bigger, badder, scarier, more terrifying. And again, I love the concept and the idea that, is that Quaritch or is it someone else? Are they one and the same, or does he have his own identity? And I think that's fascinating, and we're going to learn more about that. In fact, lots of YouTubers and lots of people who have reviewed the film that I've seen videos on have already conceptualized and discussed the possibility of him having a redemption arc, similar to, Anakin Skywalker, or, any character like that who, could sort of fall and then rise again. I feel like that's interesting, and I'm very excited to see where we go with Quaritch going forward, but beyond that, I do want to talk a little bit about his son and the whole storyline with Spider. So Spider, who, when Quaritch does see him and looks at him and sees him even in that avatar body, about midway through the film or towards the beginning, maybe an hour in, when Quaritch and his tribe sort of discover what happened to the original human Quaritch, and he crushes the skull and, sort of learn more and more and try to take Jake Sully and Natiri's kids. I found it interesting, the whole dynamic and idea that Spider is Quaritch's son. Obviously, that's going to play a big role. I mean, we notice at the end of the film, Spider saves Quaritch's avatar body, brings him up, and Quaritch even calls him son. Come on, son, come with me. So, one, Quaritch is definitely believing he is the original Quaritch. Also, he clearly has some attachment to Spider, and Spider sees that. And with that in mind, Spider believes, okay, I have to, maybe I have to be there for Quaritch too. So that's going to be an interesting storyline also to follow. But this is what I mean. I mean, at the beginning of the video, I talked so much about how there was a lot of exposition. There was a lot of setup, and that's what's fascinating to me about this film. Is it feels like a movie we are going to appreciate more when the sequels of this film come out. When the third film comes out, the fourth, fifth, we're going to look back at this film and say to ourselves, okay, I think I really love that movie a lot more because of what it set up. So I think that's something we should think about and sort of be aware of. But, before I wrap up all this spoiler talk and my full review of the film, a few more points I do want to talk about. The action was phenomenal. And the last act, the last hour of this film was incredible. And on top of that, again, I already mentioned that once the film gets to the water tribe and gets to that second act, really, of the film, that's where the film starts to find its footing. I felt like so many of the water sequences were incredible, and not just because it was visually stunning. I mean, and it is visually stunning. I mean, no YouTube reviewer or no reviewer in general, nobody who's seen the film is going to look at you and tell you, like, no, that wasn't a pretty film to look at. Like, it was mind-blowingly visually stunning, and one of the most visually stunning films I've ever seen on the big screen. But beyond that, the reason I love the water sequences was this connection on Pandora that I hope they explore more in the third, fourth, fifth film, that they are so inclined and so attached to the wildlife. And I think that's a beautiful message in itself, but it's incredible how they have this, like, unique attachment, not just to animals in the sense where, yes, they can ride on the back of animals, but there's this whole storyline with the whales, obviously. And they are so cool. The connections with these whales who not just, they can speak to them, they can understand them, and it really is about this one unique world. It's like a network, as Grace talked about in the first film. Sigourney Weaver's character is Awa, and the idea of this world being more united in a full-on network of species who are connected to each other. And if you respect each other, if you respect the planet, then the planet will give back, and the characters will give back, and the animals will give back, and the animals will come to your aid. And that, to me, is probably the most fascinating part of this film and franchise in general, because it's an amazing lesson and it relates directly to, you know, how we feel, and how we as humans should feel about our own planet, about the environment. We should respect our planet to the fullest, and we should respect each other and wildlife and animals. And if we do that, then typically that'll get reciprocated. You know, there's such thing as bad karma and good karma. So to sort of wrap this up from a pros perspective, as I talked about, this film was visually historic, truly incredible to look at, groundbreaking stuff. You see the budget on that big screen, and I saw the film in IMAX 3D, and it blew me away. The final act was obviously tremendous. As I mentioned, last hour of the film was just incredible. I mean, nonstop action. Neytiri, I didn't mention enough in this film about Neytiri. She was a huge highlight for me. Just an incredible character, and someone I believe who just really doesn't even get enough props in these films. Zoe Saldana is an incredible actress, and she nails it once again as Neytiri. But now we see Neytiri as that protective mother, and I think that was one of the highlights of the films for me. Is, you know, once we see her at the end there when she loses her son to Tam, she goes off, and it's just so cool to see how much of a warrior and how cool she is. The new characters, for the most part, really hit for me. They were all very cool. Spider, I want to learn more about, see more of. I can see why people have their issues or their sort of, you know, their reserves with Spider, but I personally think he's a very fascinating character. I just think we need to learn more about him, especially with Courage and that whole backstory. The kids are obviously the story's focus of this film, though, guys, and I think for the most part they deserve that, and they nailed it. I think all the kids were really cool. But the family dynamic of this film, you know, was the best part of it. You know, as cool as Kiri is, which I've already talked at length about her, she is so cool, and as cool as so much of this film is from a character perspective, action perspective, visual perspective, the very best part of this film is the idea of family and being connected, and how Pandora in itself can be viewed as a family. Because, as I mentioned, the idea of Awa and this planet and a network, it's about being connected and caring for one another, and Jake Sully and Neytiri figuring out how to do that with their children. And I just find that fascinating and amazing. And quickly, when it comes to the cons, as I mentioned, you know, I felt the Courage storyline was a little shoehorned and rushed in there. But at the same time, I thought he was bigger, badder, and cooler than ever. I felt like the beginning was rushed. I felt like it dragged a little bit. I wanted to, you know, sort of slow down a little bit, get to know the kids more, get more attached to the kids more, get more into that world. But maybe we'll get a director's cut or an extended edition or something like that. But overall, guys, great movie. And out of 10, I give it an 8.5 out of 10. I thought the film was phenomenal, and I thought visually it was so stunning. I thought that from top to bottom, there's just not much you could say bad about the movie. It was just incredible to watch. The sequences towards the end were incredible. And I have very little that I look back and say, oh, that was bad. I mean, I might have my little gripes with the film, but I just don't view anything that happened in this film as bad. I have certain things where I think like, oh, I wish we spent more time with that, which I think is a good sign when it comes to reviewing a film. So overall, Avatar: The Way of Water, really amazing film, 8.5 out of 10 for me. And I hope you guys go watch this on the biggest screen, on IMAX, 3D, however you can. Literally, I felt like I was a fish during some of those sequences. And, you know, you see the budget on the big screen, and that's really incredible. So for me, lived up to the hype. Absolutely worthy sequel to the original Avatar film. I'm rooting for its box office success, and I believe it will have lots of box office success. And I can't wait to see more. To be frank, I'm very excited now for Avatar 3, and I can't wait to rewatch this film a few times and get to know a lot of these characters. But Avatar: The Way of Water, what did you think about it? Did you like it? Did you enjoy it the way that I did? What were your gripes about it? Definitely let me know and let us know in the comments down below. And if you're new to the Mickey Blog YouTube channel, check us out over on our page. Hit that subscribe button. We cover all things Disney, from the parks to the cruise line to the company to the streaming service to the movies, so much more. And head over to MickeyBlog.com for constant news, articles, and more on all things Disney. So, and if you'd like to see more, of course, head on back to our channel. You can check out my spoiler-free video over on our channel as well, or you can listen to the Mickey Blog podcast, where we have weekly episodes that drop every Friday and cover all things in the Disney world. So thank you so much for tuning in to this podcast. Siva Ko, as they say, rise to the challenge, and go enjoy yourself some Avatar: The Way of Water.